Ziauddin Sardar joining us from London on this very important subject of Muslim societies in post-normal times. In fact, the word post-normal itself has been coined by Zia himself recently, and to understand the futures I mean, basic the idea of futures, of future study, and also where Muslims stand in here. And I have been following Ziauddin Sardar for a very long time. In fact, I have been his fans ever since I read his book, Desperately Seeking Paradise. And after I read that book, I was desperately seeking Professor Zia himself. I wrote to him and he wrote back to me. And since then, we have been in touch. It's been more than 15 years now, and we have been in touch regularly. And he was in India just now. Irfan Habib Saab was mentioning, and we had a wonderful meeting in Delhi, and that was 2014, almost 6 years ago. And since then, Ziabai has written extensively on so many subjects. We included Mecca, and some of the names, some names of the books have already been mentioned in the poster that was circulated to all of you. Of course, he needs no introduction. He's a polymath, a thinker, an author, a prolific writer on Islam, and a great scholar of Islam. More than a scholar, I consider Professor Ziauddin Sardar as a great thinker of Islam. He goes deep into the subject and tries to tell the Muslim world, which is steeped in backwardness thanks to what has been emanating from the conservative circles. So he's been trying his best to criticize from within and bring about some change in a Muslim society. But then it's not easy. But then he keeps trying. Like the Quranic word "sabr" is what exemplifies his approach to. He keeps at it. He doesn't give up. So just to give you a brief before we begin, I'd like to give you read out a brief biography of my friend Zia Bhai. Although he doesn't need introduction, but then for the record, I just want to say this. Ziauddin Sardar is a writer and cultural critic. He's also the editor of the quarterly Critical Muslim, former professor of law and societies at Middlesex University, and columnist on New Statesman. He is the author of over 50 books, including the international bestseller, Why Do People Hate America? I have that book with me. I have most of his books. And 2 volumes of highly acclaimed autobiography, Desperately Seeking Paradise. That is I think those who have not read this book have missed something. You have to read that book. It's a must read. Then he also wrote Balti Britain, A Provocative Journey Through Asian Britain. Then there are a collection of his writings available on Islam, postmodernism and other futures. Recently, he has published, of course, he also wrote on reading the Quran, on Quran itself in the Guardian, for the Guardian. And then the book on Mecca itself is another great, book on the very history of Mecca. In fact, the bloody history of Mecca, I must say. A lot of bloodshed had happened in Mecca and by the Muslims themselves. For people who don't know much about it, they would do well to go and read that book. And recently, he started this Center for Post-Normal Policy and Future Study, of which he's a director. And with his colleagues at this institute, he coined the term post-normal. I mean, after the term, perhaps on the lines of what post-truth is. Post-truth, as the Oxford Dictionary made it the word of the year for 2016. And as we know, post-truth means we no longer the truth actually influences people decisions or their opinions. It is basically emotionalism, is basically what is perceived as truth. The perception of truth is what rules the roost, and truth itself has become a victim of our emotionalism and perceptions. So and from there he wants to kind of bring in a link to post-normalism, because we are not living in normal times in any way. So therefore, where do Muslims fit in? And I mean, what should be the Muslim approach in these times? This is where he's here to discuss today. And now I request him, I think it's time to bring him in now. I request Zia Bhai to take over now. He'll speak for about 45 minutes through a PowerPoint presentation. And after that, there'll be a 5-minute break. And then we rejoin after 5 minutes. There will be a question and answer session for about 60 minutes. And that will be totally moderated. And the questions or any comments must be limited to the subject discussed here and in the most civil way. And we have been very strict in the past to Any comment or what do you call, whether it is oral or written, which actually does not uh, uh, is uncivil or in any way rude, will result in the expulsion of the participant from the room. Thank you so much, friends. Zia bhai, over to you.
Okay, assalamu alaikum to everybody. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And I'm so glad to meet all of you, some old friends who I haven't seen for a long time. At least it's good to see them through Zoom, even if we can't meet physically. Okay, so what I'm going to do is to first talk about the post-normal times theory, and then point out some of the challenges that Muslim societies face due to post-normal times. And then in the question and answer, we can kind of develop them much further. I've been thinking about change. I mean, most of my futures research and futures thought is devoted to change. How does change happen? And what is causing change in a sense? And for the last 10 years, since in fact 2010, I've been working on post-normal times, which is a description of what is happening now. Yeah, how is the now, the present is changing. And since the present is changing so rapidly, it will have major impact on the future, and the future itself will be changing constantly according to how the present is changing. So I just want to draw your mind away from COVID-19, because I'm sure everybody is quite obsessed and concerned with COVID-19 because it's dominating our thought at the moment, and just go back a few years. And one of the things that I wanted to say has already been mentioned, is that in 2016, the Oxford University Dictionary's word of the year was post-truth, which suggests that the notion of truth as absolute is now under question, right? Part of this is a product of postmodernism, which relativized truth anyway, but now we are in a place where truth itself doesn't seem to have as much validity as it had historically. 2019, that's last year, the Oxford Dictionary's word was climate emergency. Now these words actually reflect the kind of zeitgeist of the time, the current theme, the dominant theme that the world is facing. So climate emergency is the one. It's interesting to look at the short list of words in 2019. There's climate action, crisis and denial. There's anxiety about the ecology of the earth. Even the notion that we may actually be committing ecocide and moving towards extinctions. Now these are all, and of course global heating. Now these are not just words, they have significance behind them. They have concern, and in most cases they also have evidence for example, there's a great deal of evidence for climate action, and indeed there's a great deal of evidence for global heating and extinction. So over the last few years, there's a whole kind of plethora of books talking about post-truth in various manifestations, post-truth and how it reflects on politics, with the arrival of Trump and Boris Johnson in England and also in Europe. What does it mean in terms of science and technology? What does it mean in terms of social relations, social media, and so on and so forth? There's a whole kind of discourse of post-truth, if you like, out there. And you may have be aware of the famous Rudy Giuliani.
It's somebody's version of the truth, not the truth. Truth is truth. I don't mean to go like, no, it isn't truth. Truth isn't truth. Truth isn't truth. This is going to become a bad don't do this to me.
So truth isn't truth. And of course, that leads to kind of various ideological positions where the positions are defended in as blatantly as possible in terms of lies, with absolutely no relation to the truth. So you had Aung San Suu Kyi, who was admired in the West. She got the Nobel Prize. They made a film about her called The Lady, right? Great heroine of the West. And this is what she told the court in Hague. There was no genocide regarding Rohingya. The exodus of hundreds of thousands of Rohingya Muslims in neighboring Bangladesh was the unfortunate result of a battle with insurgents. So the absolutely and utter blatant lie it's become the norm, and most of the kind of ideological defense now basically is based on things which have virtually hardly any relationship to truth. Then we've had all sorts of problems. I've been living through Brexit for last 4 or 5 years. I mean, the whole enterprise was based on lies, and in fact, some of these lies we are uttered with great pride, and kind of we are now in a situation that we are in. And then, of course, the election of Trump and Boris Johnson, again, both to a very large extent based on lies and very, very surprising. I remember talking to a friend of mine about 6 months before the last US election, 2016, and I said that looks like Trump is going to, come through. In fact, we predicted that Trump will win. And he said, no, and Americans are very sensible. They will not elect a lunatic as a president. And that's exactly what they did. And again, Boris Johnson, known for his politics, as a journalist, he lied regularly, produced fake stories. He doesn't even know how many children he has, right? Elected with a majority of 80. So there is a shift in society as well. There are segments of society that actually support the post-truth. This post-truth is not just a word. It's actually having a real impact on society as a whole, which also suggests it will have some impact on the future as well. So in general, throughout the world, excuse me, I need to. In general, throughout the world, we are seeing all these strange people being elected. So people you wouldn't trust to post a letter for you have been elected to the highest office. They behave like a gang of vandals given the key of an art gallery. They rip down environmental protection and climate agreements and trash the regulations that constrain capital and defend the poor. They wage war on the institutions that are supposed to restrain their powers, while in some cases committing extravagant and deliberately committing extravagant and deliberate outrages against the rule of law. This is a quote from George Monbiot, who is a Guardian journalist. They use impunity as a political weapon, dabbling in their ability to survive daily scandals, any one of which would destroy a normal politician. So this is not a normal politics, right? And it's politics that is now becoming, if it is not the dominant politics, it is a very major strand in world politics. And here are some products of this politics. Belisano, openly fascistic ideas, is now president of Brazil. The president of Hungary and Poland also support extreme far-right views, and they could hardly be described as Democrats. And the interesting thing is they are actually prime ministers of European nations. My son trying to get him in. And this then brings us in a very interesting place. Europe, which is supposed to be the bastion of democracy, is now awash with far-right movements, right? In France, 1/3 of the population actually support the far right. In many European countries, far right's in power. And in fact, almost 35%, anywhere from 20 to 35% of members of the European Parliament are actually from the far right political parties, which is very interesting, given that the whole function of the European Union was to kind of stop the far right. It was set up. The whole idea was after the Second World War. What happened in Germany should never happen again. And even in Germany, good 10-15% of the population support the far right. So that's a development that European Union was established to stop. Yet it is now becoming a bastion, an incubator of far right thought. So that's a kind of very abnormal, if you like, situation, if you think. And if you look at the whole kind of climate change situation, there's a very famous photograph of an emaciated polar bear because the ice is melting. She doesn't know what to do, can't find any food. It's a classic kind of photograph that focuses our mind as something profound is happening to the world climate. Ice is melting, sea levels are rising, and that will have its consequences. Temperatures increasing around the world. Increase within 3-4 months of last year. In some places, the temperature is reaching 40 to 49, 50, 51 degrees, which will make it impossible for most human beings to actually live in that area or in that city. And there's some very serious risks to big cities that are that comes from climate change. Large cities like Bombay, Karachi, Lagos, right, that are expanding very, very rapidly. They will have various serious effect from climate change. And flooding, a regular event. I mean, in Britain, every year, part of England floods, every year. And we've seen how many floods there have been in the United States, for example. Flooding in Bangladesh, in Philippines, is becoming a more rapid and accelerated event. And now we can see hurricanes, not just one hurricane coming, but hurricanes coming in batches. Like here you have three or four hurricanes. Fourth one is being formed while 3 hurricanes are fully developed. Right, that's something that's kind of never happened in history. And fires, forest fires. There have been more forest fires in the last 3 or 4 years than in the last 20-30 years. The last one here, this is California, and I was reading an article, very interesting article by a Californian academic, and she was saying that why are people objecting to isolation? We in California, where she lives, have been in isolation for the last 4 years, because every year they had a huge fire and they were not allowed to get out of the house, or indeed they had to leave the house because the house itself was about to burn. And we saw Australia last year, the famous photograph of Australia burning, how much carbon oxide it kind of released into the air. Now, this is the Nile, right? And it's a river that actually provides fresh water and agriculture water to 4 or 5 countries, starting from Egypt to Sudan, all the way down. But this is what's happening to it now.
This is the majestic Nile, the world's longest river, crucial to the survival of millions of people. But now the river's existence is threatened like never before.
Everywhere you walk, it's all plastic.
For the first time, we reveal the full extent of plastic pollution across 5 countries.
All of this, parts of it couldn't have been washed off straight down.
And see how it's poisoning the fish in the water.
That's plastic in the middle of
the it is actually predicted that the Nile will die within 10 years. If the trends continue, if it continues to be polluted like that, which means vast quantity of devastation in that part of the world. Just imagine how many people rely on the Nile. But something interesting is happening as well. The things is that the conventional disciplines that we thought were there for us, you know, to develop our thought and make progress, have now been weaponized. A whole string of disciplines. Mathematics has been weaponized. Anthropology, this is a very good book, Weaponizing Anthropology. It's really worth reading how anthropology is being weaponized. Economics has been weaponized. So disciplines are not disciplines anymore. They're becoming more like weapons. So that's a very, very strange and abnormal development. We can even now put malware in human body. Not just that we have malware in computers, but in fact, biohackers encoded malware in a strand of DNA in two or three years ago. Right? It became a big story. I don't know whether it reached India or not, but in scientific circle, it was a very big story. So the hacking question is not just a question of hacking, you know, computers and infrastructure, and kind of laboratories, but you can also hack human beings, which is quite a frightening and an unusual development. And higher education is not what it used to be anymore, right? Much of it seems to be irrelevant to what is going on in the world. This is very interesting. Here, this is a group of students from University of Manchester, Department of Economics, who came out in protest saying we refuse to study these subjects because it is becoming totally irrelevant. It has no relevance to our society. In fact, it is making things worse rather than better. And after long negotiations with the university, they went back on the condition that they will be allowed to write a book which explains why they came out. And Manchester University Press actually published the first version of this book called Rethinking Economics by the two or three leaders of this protest. And since then, it's been published by Routledge, and even it's now in Penguin paperback. And then, of course, we come to the contagion. People move nowadays like they have never moved before. We travel so frequently and so kind of globally. That's a very unusual thing historically to do. So contagions can spread very, very rapidly. Remember, Zika virus started in a remote village in Mexico, right? And nobody thought that actually it will go very far because it's such a remote village. But within the 3-4 days, it appeared in the United States, in Florida, and then it spread from there. But fortunately, that particular contagion was contained. But of course, this one we have not been able to contain, and it's become a global pandemic. And the interesting thing is that a virus that most biologists do not even consider to be a proper life form has actually stopped the world in its track. Stop the world traveling, stop the world meeting other people, engaging with other people physically, stopped economic activity, indeed almost as though it has a stop time, right? But that's something that is very unusual and has not happened in history before to this extent. So the question is, if you are not confused, you are not paying attention, says Tom Peters. There is something going on out there which is very, very unusual, that is causing a great deal of confusion, that things are not as they used to be. So what is going on?
It's a noisy, chaotic, confusing world. If only everyone could see it more clearly, separate fake from fact. If only we all understood what's really going on. The world needs another economist reader.
Well, I don't think the world needs another economist reader, but the Economist advertisement does make a very good point that it's a very confusing, contradictory, and chaotic world, right? And how do you make sense of it? Of this, all these things that that are quite unique over time, seems to me, and there's no, for some of them, there's no historical precedence at all. So the question is, what is going on, and how do we make sense of what is going on? Because what is going on is the present, and it will have a profound impact on the future. So the now, we need to understand the now, and now is becoming quite problematic. You should not be surprised to hear that a lot of people, a lot of scholars have actually devoted some time to trying to understand what is going on. So Zygmunt Bauman, the late Zygmunt Bauman, a brilliant sociologist, British-Polish sociologist, called it liquid time, that things are melting. The center does not hold together. So we are in if you like, liquid time. Thomas Friedman, the right-wing economist and columnist for New York Times, says it's a period of global weirding. All weird things are happening at a global level that we don't seem to understand. Robert Carlyle, a technology journalist, says we are experiencing a great acceleration. Things are moving faster and faster, and we are constantly out of breath. So we don't know what is going on, and we are thus perplexed. Alan Curtis, a British documentary maker, calls it hypernormalization. Now, he actually has a film called Hypernormalization, which you can find on YouTube and actually watch it. It's absolutely brilliant. It shows what's going on, how the world is changing. Then we have the very interesting notion of the Anthropocene, which was first suggested by a geologist, but now is actually accepted as a period where we have moved from the old geological period, the Holocene, to a new period, the Anthropocene, where the impact of human beings on the geology and ecology of the planet is profound. It is the first time that human beings are now actually having a direct impact on the ecology and the geology of the planet. Now, normally the geological scales, the various geological periods, are divided in millions of years based on mass extinctions. 3 million years probably is 3 million years is probably the smallest period of time. But the interesting thing is that the transformation from the Holocene to Anthropocene is only like 13 or 14,000 years. So that's a very interesting development, which also suggests that we are moving faster, not just in technology and social media, etc., but also in geological terms, we seem to be moving faster. The Korean philosopher calls it the burned out society. By the way, some of these are also titles of the books, so you can actually get the books and actually check them. The Tablet, the Catholic newspaper, says we are living in an age of anxiety, and you all have heard about Extinction Rebellion. The main architect is a thinker called Roger Helm, who's saying that we are heading towards extinction, and it's time to really stand up and do something about it. Otherwise, we are all kind of heading for a collapse. And some of the technologists and science journalists are describing as the new dark age. And you probably heard of Susan Zoba's famous book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, where she's saying we are now moved into a new age where surveillance capitalism itself, not capitalism anymore, but it's become a surveillance capitalism, where we as human beings are the kind of both products as well as the basic unit of consumption. We are being consumed by capitalism over likes and dislikes, desires, and what makes us who we are. The very being is being sucked into capitalism, and capitalism is now transmuted into a kind of new monster. So all of these things are correct in that sense. They are not they're not wrong. All of these viewpoints presented by various scholars, it seems to me, are correct, but they're only part of the truth. I mean, it's a bit like the elephant and the blind man. They're capturing the essence of little bits here and describing them in a really, if you like, realistic and truthful way. But they only represent a particular context. Right? We need to kind of step back and look at what's happening in a much bigger and broader picture. So in general, we can say that all those things that were normal are dissolving, and now we are moving towards the post-normal times, in the sense that we are moving in an age where the normal has collapsed. Right? The term the post-normal times the post-normal has a longer history than post-normal times. The term post-normal times were actually kind of different, was a product of my ideas, which emerged in 2010. But the notion of post-normal has a much longer history, which if you read the post-normal times reader, you can find out it provides you there. So this is how I define the post-normal times in a paper called Welcome to Post-Normal Times, which was published in Futures. So we are living in between, the in-between period where old orthodoxies are dying, new ones have not yet emerged, and nothing really makes sense. That's the essence of post-normal times. It's not the end of times, it's the in-between period, right? Where the normal is the orthodoxies, the dominant paradigms are collapsing, but the new paradigm and we have the new ideas have not actually developed. So we are kind of in between. So this was one particular definition that I came up with 2010, but there have been others since then. So this is by Moro, who is an Italian journalist. We are hanging between the no longer and the not yet, and thus we are necessarily unstable. So what causes, what has forced us or brought us to this stage? What causes this post-normality, if you like? Right? So the reason behind that are certain drivers that drive post-normal change.
Ziauddin, Sardar.
Now, you all recognize this lady, and you all recognize these two. Notice how quickly both of them became a global icon. Within literally a year, Greta Thunberg protesting on her own in front of the Swedish parliament became a global icon. Basically, you know, the kind of biggest celebrity, climate change celebrity going at the moment, within a year. And Malala, from being shot as a student by the Taliban, then arriving in London, recovering, and then speaking in the United Nations and getting the Nobel Prize, and then writing a biography, all within 18 to 20 months. So there's something going on. People did not become so famous and so globally known in such a period of time. So something is going on in there. And we know same thing about the Me Too movement, how quickly the Me Too movement, and these slides are slightly older, they're about 6-7 months old, but if we update them, we can put Black Lives Matter there as well, how quickly these movements have become global and the impact they have had. It's not just that they have become global very, very quickly, but the impact they have had is also quite profound. Now this lady is was an executive for a very famous corporation. I'm not sure it was IBM or not. She left, took a flight, I think, from Los Angeles to Cape Town, and before getting on the plane, she tweeted, "Going to Africa, hope I don't get AIDS. Just kidding, I'm white." Right. So it was a form of a joke on a tweet, but the flight, I think about 12-14 hours flight. By the time she arrived at the flight, there was a phenomenal kind of storm, and in fact, she lost her job. So within a kind of a day, so things are happening very, very rapidly, right? And the ironic thing is she was a communication executive, so she should have known better, but never mind. How quickly things have moved, right? So within a very short period, you can generate a storm that can have a profound impact on your personal life. Speed. Things are happening with great speed. What is really driving post-normal change is speed. We are really accelerating, right? Change, the nature of change itself is changing. Not just that we are moving faster and faster, but the nature of change itself is changing. And you can show that very easily how things have speeded up if you want to. But it's not just speed, but also scope. We tend to, whatever we do has global scope. Never in history, for example, we can talk instantly or send a message instantly to millions of people throughout the globe, right? One tweet can reach millions of people. That level of scope has never existed in history. And of course, scale as well. I mean, the very idea that you yourself as individuals are safe from what is going on around the world on the globe is ridiculous, because as we saw this, she lost her job within within kind of 24-hour period, basically, right? So speed, scope, and scale are the most kind of important things. But there's one other thing that is also a very major driver of contemporary time. And that thing we owe to this man, the former General Secretary of UN, Ban Ki-moon, who pointed out that we are living through an era like no other. There are multiple crises: a food crisis, fuel crisis, flu crisis, financial crisis. Each is a crisis we have not seen for many years, even generations. But this time they're hitting the world all at once. It's the simultaneity of events. It's not just that events are happening very fast globally and having an impact locally as well, but that they also tend to happen simultaneously. So these are the 4 S's, the 4 drivers of post-normal times, right? Speed, scope, scale, and simultaneity. This is what's causing post-normal change. You really have to understand change from now on. This is what we need to study and explore. But so what are the consequences of these, the 4 S's, the speed, scope, scale, and simultaneity, right? That's what we call the post-normal forces, or the kind of end product of these drivers. So one of them is this. So these are basically birds in flight, but they're executing a complex movement, right? Things are becoming complex. Things are becoming, when you have interconnection, you have various segments and ideas and topics and events all happening simultaneously. They become interconnected, and that interconnection eventually reaches a stage. So we have complexity. This is a map done by, quite an old map, in fact, done by a company called Coin Dynamics. They were asked by the United States Army to kind of produce a map or an idea of how they can win the war. What do they have to do? So they produced this. You should see this in 3 dimensions. Rather, it's a 2-dimensional map for a complex system, but you should see it in a 3-dimension how interlinked the things are. And the general says, if we understand this map, then we can win the war in Afghanistan. Of course, they didn't. They declared victory and left. and what a mess they left behind, because the situation was so complex that it was practically impossible for them to actually manage and control it. So complexity is one of the basic features of post-normal times. Things are complex, things are interconnected, right? And therefore, simple answers do not exist. You cannot separate and isolate systems and assume that you can find a solution for them. Things are complex and interconnected. Therefore, you have to think in complex terms. Complex problems require complex solutions. I mean, that's one of the law. It's called law of requisite variety. If you have a complex problem, you need a complex approach to actually understand it. Another example of complexity, right? Many years ago, I was one of the first commissioners for Equality and Human Rights Commission in Britain. And my responsibility was religion but one of my colleagues was also responsible for gays and lesbians. And in those days, I'm talking about 2008, 2009, something like that, we had to find equality registration for people like LGBT+. That was basically it. So a couple of years ago, it became LGBT and trans, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans. Then we had all these people, queer, intersex, sexual, and gender non-conforming. Then only 3 years ago, we have all these varieties of sexual orientation and preferences, etc., etc. Now, these are not just descriptions. These are about people. They are people who actually describe themselves as such and demand to be treated in that. And you can find all these in the Durham University Student Union website, where they have the Durham University LGBT Association. You can go and say they represent all of these people. Right? So even in human relations and human sexuality, complexity is becoming the norm. Things are moving in a very complex direction. So that's the other thing is also very, very important. The second main product, if you like, or characteristic of post-normal times is very well described in this photograph. So this photograph is Qasim's Girls' Council, but you notice that there are no women there, right? So there's a major contradiction here, right? They are representing someone who is not represented on the council itself, right? So contradictions are also a basic characteristic of post-normal times. In fact, they tend to proliferate, which is not surprising. If you have complex situations, you will have complex kind of interactions and complex positions and complex perspectives, and many of them will be contradictory. This is a photograph that tells us some of the kind of basic contradictions in American society. So one of these is banned in American schools. The other thing is not banned. So there's a girl holding a machine gun, and the boy is actually holding a chocolate egg, a kindergarten chocolate egg, which when you eat it, there's a little toy that comes out of it. So I let you decide which one is allowed in the school and which one is banned in the school. And of course, rich, poor, contradictions very, very deep. Now we know that every year, less and less number of people control greater and greater proportion of the wealth of the earth. 4 or 5 years ago, Oxfam publishes this result every year, the survey every year. 4 or 5 years ago, there were 650 people, around 650 people who controlled something like 90% of the wealth. Then it went down to 400, 300, and now it's down to about 250. Again, you can check all this. That's very easy to find on the internet. Contradictions. So complexity and contradictions, two basic features of post-normal times, characteristic of post-modern times. And the third is this. Of course, this we all know. This is 2009 financial crash, which was described as a chaotic event. you recall the Economist ad I just showed you where they describe the world is becoming chaotic. So chaos is also a kind of a major characteristic of post-normal times. So this is a major chaos, but not all chaos is on a large scale. So this looks like something that is really heavily chaotic event. Looks like people are running away maybe from a terrorist attack or something really serious is happening. But actually they're all hunting for a Pokemon. So chaos can take different forms. It can be mega, and it can also be a micro at micro level, but it's still a chaotic event. These are just jellyfish, and we in post-normal times theory we use jellyfish as one of our kind of what we call the post-normal menageries. They illustrate a particular point. They serve as metaphor. Jellyfish normally do not exist happily, but under certain circumstances, they bloom very rapidly and become chaotic, right? So for example, if you raise the temperature of the sea by 1 to 2 degrees, or you increase the salinity of the seawater, something happens and they bloom, right? And as a result, they've been causing quite a lot of chaos around the world. They penetrated nuclear power plants and really brought them in crashing down. They've even stopped the huge aircraft carriers. You know, they're almost like cities. They've entered their turbines, etc. And in fact, concern is that there is some sort of jellyfish apocalypse approaching sometime in the future. So we use jellyfish as one of our mottos, if you like. So chaos is so essentially to understand post-normal times, you need to understand complexity, you need to understand contradictions, which by the way, being contradictions cannot be resolved, they can only be transcended, and you have to understand chaos. These are the three major characteristics of post-normal times. And if you want to see if a system is about to go post-normal, in other words, it's about to go chaotic, you need to understand what's going on, how complex it is, how many contradictions there are. So that's the first part of my presentation, talking about post-normal times. Now, what does it mean for Muslim societies? What I'm going to do is just to present some challenges rather than go through a very deep analysis. And the first is this, that the future in general is being colonized. It's been colonized by technology, it's been colonized by post-truth ideology, it's been colonized by speed, etc., right? And if you do not shape your own future, then somebody else will. In other words, we need to start thinking of future in a different way. It is not something that is a priori given, right? That's the first thing. It can be shaped. That's a realization that we need to understand, and we need to appreciate that if we do not think about our own future, then somebody else will think about it. That future, like history, just like in history, can be colonized, right? And colonization is not something that is simply limited to history. So your future will be colonized, and you'll be part of somebody else's future. That's the kind of first realization that we need to think about and be concerned about. Here is a very interesting example of how the future was analyzed. When I was writing my book, The Future of Muslim Civilization, it's my second book, right? And I was living in Jeddah. This is 1977, right? So I was kind of desperate to find material about the future in Muslim scholarship, and I couldn't find anything. It was hardly anything apart from kind of eschatology stuff, you know, the spectacle of grave after death, this sort of stuff, right? And Yajuj Majuj. That, you know, there was absolutely nothing that I could actually use. And that's why you actually, those of you who have read the book, you will see that it's my own vision rather than based on anything. But I did manage to find this. The Future of Islam by W.S. Blunt in 1882, who was actually a administrator, colonial administrator of Egypt. And he did some very simple stuff of what is the population of Egypt in the area, what is the educational requirements, how educated these people and all that, and all that. On the basis of that, he predicted something, and he came up with policies and sent to the Foreign Office in London. And the Foreign Office more or less followed his policies for the next 50, 60 years. And it had a major impact on that. So here is somebody else who is studying us and shaping our future while we kind of are neglecting our own exploration of the future. Or another way of having the future colonized is, of course, to buy somebody's ready-made future. So here we have the 230 Saudi Arabian vision, which is basically bought off the shelf from a multinational corporation. Literally, you can find that on the kingdom's website very easily, and you notice that there's absolutely nothing original about it.
To write humanity's next chapter.
Here is a kind of a
over 25,000 square kilometers of inspiration, with room for your biggest ideas. A part of the world set aside for those who want to change the world. A land created to free people from stress. A place where pioneers and thinkers and doers can exchange ideas and get things done. A startup the size of a country that will change the way we live.
Let's move forward. We don't particularly want to look at the whole thing, but here we go. So this place will have flying cars, a fake moon, 24-hour surveillance. It'd be a wonderful thing. But of course, this is all standard stuff. It has nothing to do with the Muslim society. It has nothing to do with Saudi Arabia. And if you find that, by the way, that video you can find on YouTube very easily. You notice there's not a single Saudi or Arab or anybody who could remotely be regarded as local in that video. Right? It is essentially a bought vision of somebody else's. And one of the recommendations of the vision was that Saudi Arabia should invest in stock. So they bought half of Uber, and they've set up this multi-billion-dollar fund to promote all kind of technology, including alternative, including artificial intelligence and something else. So that's another way of how future can be colonized. This is Vision 2020 Malaysia. Again, you can go and check it and see it has actually been realized to some extent, and you can see that how Kuala Lumpur now resembles a kind of a Disney World. There's a whole new city called Petrojaya, which is basically like an Arabian Nights Hollywood set, basically the facade of an Arabian Night Hollywood set. You do need to bring your own people, your own values, your own concerns into shaping a vision before you want to do anything about it. Otherwise, you're just using a used future, as we call it. And of course, the whole digital economy itself is a way of colonizing the future, and there's lots and lots of stuff out there about that. So I would say that one of the first things that we need to think about and step back is how do we decolonize our own future, right? How do we bring our own values or our own concerns, requirements into shaping the kind of future that we want. But there are also certain important things, some of them I already talked about, which require urgent attention from Muslims. So climate change, for example, is a clear thing. The Muslim world is the kind of middle belt of the equatorial middle belt, from Morocco to Indonesia. In fact, that was one of the description of the Muslim world, we are the middle belt. And the first impact of climate change will be on the middle belt, right? So we are the people who are going to suffer most from changes in various climate things. And we are also amongst the bulk of the refugees of the world. At this moment, 2 out of 3 refugees in the world are Muslim. And within the next 10 to 15 years, 4 out of 5 refugees in the world will be Muslim. And in the conventional refugee, there'll be a new category of refugee, which is being recognized already, by the way, environmental refugees. These will be the people who will be the victims of climate change and would not be able to live in their own cities and countries, and they'll have to move out. Where will they go? So the proportion of Muslim refugees in the world will increase. So there'll be 4 out of 5 within the next 10 to 15 years. We are part of the world where we're going to, fresh water is going to run out most quickly within the next 10 to 20 years. Cape Town ran out of water 2 or 3 years ago. Chennai will run out of water within the next 10, 15 years. Jakarta is already drowning in water, and they're going to move the city to Borneo. So Jakarta will not be the capital of Indonesia in the next 5 to 10 years. There'll be a new capital they're building because the city itself is sinking. Even cities like Istanbul could run out of fresh water within the next 20 years if the trends continue. So this is the water stress basin. This is the map of kind of dried area. This is about Chennai. It was taken in 2019. But there are lots of cities in South Asia which face similar threats. Temperature. Last year, the temperature in Karachi was 49 degrees. Several hundred people died. But if it continues to increase, as it can for the next 3 or 4 degrees, easily passes over 50 degrees, then where will people go? You cannot physically exist if the temperatures reach 55, 60 degrees. In a city somewhere here, Iranian city somewhere here, a couple of years ago reached 55 degrees. Again, several hundred people died, several thousand people died, in fact. So that's a major challenge that we need to consider ourselves. Let's forget about that. And then there is this question of medicine and antibiotics. We are the people who still have polio in Pakistan. Polio still exists thanks to the Taliban and the fundamentalists. Cholera is still common in most of the Muslim parts of the world. And if we run out of antibiotics, which is a real concern, then we will be among the first people to suffer. And also we are the countries where the antibiotic use has been the most. So the superbugs, bugs that are not affected by antibiotics, are also largely found in what we call the global middle belt. So there's some real concerns in the that we need to pay urgent attention to. But there's some opportunities as well. Most of our population is young. So, Iran, an average age is something like 25 to 30. Pakistan, just around 30. Most Muslim countries have a relatively young population. In contrast to the West, in fact, only 2 weeks ago, new predictions came out which suggested there's going to be a major crisis in Europe because the population is aging very fast. There won't be enough young people to actually generate enough wealth to pay for the pensions of all that aging population. But in contrast, the Muslim world has mostly young population. So we know the future belongs to young. So in that respect, this provides an opportunity. There are 5 to 30 million Muslims who are in fact around 30 and below. Also in the European Union, the Muslim world, the Muslim communities have very young population and in most cases quite highly educated, if not educated, at least literate, and they could have a major impact on Europe. And also because they have probably a bit more resources, they could have an impact also on Muslim societies as well. However, on the other side, yes, there are few things to consider. They are the most corrupt people in every corruption index. Most of the Muslim world are right at the top. On literacy, most of the Muslim world is right at the bottom. And in creativity, we are also nowhere on the top. We are also the least creative, right? So all of these are kind of major concerns that we need to think about. So this is just to bring a few concerns. I mean, there's a whole area that post-normal times throws up that we need to talk about. But due to lack of time, I'm just focusing on the climate change aspect of it, and we can talk about other things in the discussion. So what I want to say is that to shape viable futures, we need to learn to navigate complexity, chaos, and contradictions. This is the message of the post-normal times, that if you want to do something about climate change, or if you want to do something about young population that we have, and how do we prepare them for future challenges, right? If you want to do something about refugees, trying to reduce the level of refugees, or finding an instant, a relatively quick accommodation to show that they have a kind of viable life rather than simply exist. All of these problems require us to understand complexity, contradictions, and chaos. And most of the stuff that I talked about, you can find in this book, which goes through not just climate change, but lots of other stuff. So it's a pretty reasonably comprehensive analysis of the trends to show what are the challenges and concerns, and also emerging issues. For example, how will artificial intelligence impact Muslim societies? How will bioengineering impact Muslim societies? So it also deals with the host of emerging issues, and also provides some kind of creative scenarios to explore. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Well,
thanks a lot.
Welcome to Post-Normal Times.